Lobster, you got it back yet? Lobster's a 10, I told you grab it.
Welcome to Lobster Magnets Review the channel. I am here to do my final E3 press conference review for this year, and that is Sony. And I think Sony, hands down, had the best one. I've heard some people complain that the format was kind of weird and didn't quite work in terms of, and I do agree that like having like different venues and like shifting people from one conference hall to the other was very awkward. But I do think it was very effective in that Last of Us 2 presentation, where it's like they're in this like sort of church space, they've got these lights, then the screen turns on after the creative director's done strumming his guitar, and oh my god, it's for the thing from the game that we're in real life. Oh, that's so cool. And, you know, Sony basically won by not trying to have, you know, incredibly hype announcements. They basically came out and said, you know, these are the 4 games that we're going to promote. These are our big heavy hitters. You know, we've got Last of Us Part 2, Ghosts of Tsushima, Spider-Man PS4, and Death Stranding. And all these games had great presentations. Last of Us Part 2, you know, looks like a next level animation increases. You know, just as incredibly cinematic and dynamic as we were all expecting, even if it was, you know, sort of repetitive in terms of seeing little girls go around and stab people and stealth kills. It still looks like a really amazing game. And, you know, they doubled down in the fact of making Ellie, you know, I mean, she was sort of like it was implied in, like, the DLC, the Left Behind DLC, that she was a lesbian. So, you know, here they sort of doubled down on it, and which is really funny given the fact that, like, people are like, oh, hey, isn't that Ellen Page? She looks just like Ellen Page. So now they're, like, taking the Ellen Page fantasy to the next logical conclusion, given the fact that Ellen Page, you know, came out as being gay. So Ellie is gay. So it'll be interesting to see what the cultural reception is. So far, it hasn't been, like, too... There are a few people who are like, oh, you're throwing down your values in my game. Ah. But Last of Us has always kind of had, like, progressive values. They had that, like, gay couple who were, like, supporting characters. And Ellie was shown to be canonically gay. So this is just following through with that. And it was a good, strong gameplay presentation. And Ghosts of Tsushima, I was really surprised at how gorgeous that looked. That also looked dynamic. And we also got a lot of slashing swords and melee action. A lot more than we usually get. And, you know, between that and, like, the From Software's also samurai game, plus Neo 2, we're going through, like, a melee fighting resurgence. But yeah, that was a gorgeous presentation. I wasn't really invested in that game, but that definitely kind of changed my opinion. It just looked really, really well presented, and a great showing from Sucker Punch Studios. Spider-Man, which is I think is the only one that's coming out this year, again looks strong, more open world gameplay as well as showing the Sinister Six. It looks like it'll be as good, if not better, than the Arkham games, and it'll be the best Spider-Man game we've seen in a long time, ever since the good old PS2 era, where you can actually, you know, do web stringing to buildings in real time. You know, it's not necessarily the most visually impressive game, and I do, you know, I'm not a huge fan of the QuickTime events. I always think that's a lazy gameplay device, but it still looks like a fun game. You know, I'd pick it up if I had a PS4. And you know, that's what, like, Sony did, is that, like, you know, they had a few surprise announcements, like the Resident Evil 2 trailer remake, which looks like a lot of fun to see, like, you know, RE4 gameplay mechanics getting an overhaul with a great graphical presentation. That looks amazing. I'm sure that'll be a multi-release. I don't think that'll be exclusive. And Sony just had a really strong show in terms of, like, showing off. The only thing that I think, you know, I think they effectively won E3. They had the strongest presentation. The only reason why I don't think they, you know, ascended to, like, all-time great status is I think Death Stranding's showing was a little weak. We got, like, a gameplay trailer to show that, like, you know, all the crazy Kojima ramblings, you know, aren't just incoherent babble, that there is actually a playable game. Unfortunately, the game didn't, like, look super compelling from what we've seen, the Norman Reedus Super Postman Simulator, where he just wanders about with, like, huge amounts of luggage from one desolate landscape to the next. But the more I've watched the trailer, the more hypnotic I've found it, the more intrigued I've been, and it feels like we're getting a little bit more details in terms of, you know, Hideo Kojima talked about, like, that usually, you know, games are like sticks where you, like, poke at people together, and that's the sort of interaction. And he wanted to make chains about things that connected people, and that was going to be the core gameplay that affects Death Stranding. So we see that in the terms of like Norman Reedus being like this delivery guy who's delivering stuff, connecting people. We see that in terms of his little, clone baby, which apparently is like, from what we're learning, is the way that he resurrects after, apparently the mysterious shadow demon things have like time powers where they make things age at an incredibly accelerated rate. So they age you to death, and then you come back by having this little clone baby, which is so weird and wonderful, and, only Kojima could come up with something like that. But it feels like we're getting a better, clearer picture of what Death Stranding is all about. And, the more I see it, the more I see his hypnotic trailers, the more I see weird umbrellas, the more I want to learn. And, it's really exciting in terms of, like, that we have this, like, new IP that's not based on anything, that is in a gameplay genre nobody really understands, that has a lot of people excited. And, that's what I like to see from E3, is, like, new things that have people genuinely excited, that have a tremendous amount of hype. And, it's nice to see that Kojima has a blank check to bring his Norman Reedus walking simulator to life. And I'm looking forward to it. I just wish it was a little bit more of a dynamic presentation in terms of, like, seeing something else besides Norman Reedus walking around. But hey, at least we see what the gameplay kind of looks like. Let's just hope it's a little bit more exciting than wandering around desolated cities and mountains to beautiful music. But, Sony definitely had a great presentation. Wasn't quite a barn burner, it could have been, but generally the titles are more solid, they're more exclusives than, all those games seem more interesting than Gears of War 5 or Halo Infinite. And they're all things that I would much rather play. And, oh man, did I put my horse in the wrong basket for Microsoft, because Microsoft has been abysmal this generation, and PS4 really learned from Sony's learned from their mistakes of the PS3 era and their, arrogance that came from the PS2 era. And they are just doing an amazing job with, like, just constantly putting out great software. They're getting, of course, all the third-party software. And, it doesn't matter if, like, Xbox One X has 80 terabytes to do their incredible 4K resolution. If you're just playing the same games that look marginally better than what's on Sony, and Sony has games that you can't play, then, it's no competition, sadly enough. So, Sony's definitely, I'd say, the clear-cut winner in this competition, and they won E3. They had a better, solid show. They had more interesting games. There sadly weren't any exciting new announcements, but, those 4 strong games, plus the side games and their indie stuff and the VR stuff, and the stuff they had between and the RE2, just was a really great show. And, I wish Microsoft would take some lessons in terms of, like, getting those, like, big WoW games, or at least games that intrigue people with, they're trying to by getting those studios, but given the fact what happened to Rare under Microsoft's guidance, where, they were, like, one of the keystones of Nintendo's success for the, good old SNES and Nintendo 64 eras, and, they haven't done anything worthwhile in a long time, except for Viva Pinata, which nobody gives a shit about, or Grabbed by the Ghoulies, nobody gave a shit about that. Perfect Dark is completely dead. A bunch of shitty Kinect games that nobody talks about anymore now that the Kinect is dead and the motion control fad is completely dead. And of course, Sea of Thieves, or as I like to call it, Sea of Disappointment. So, we've just seen Microsoft treat developers really terribly. Like, Peter Molyneux's Lionhead hasn't done anything. Fable's pretty much dead. They just don't have many exclusive franchises, and it's kind of sad to see things, go so far from what was once so promising. And, Sony won. They hands down kicked Microsoft's ass. Nintendo had a sort of weaker showing. And, it was a good conference. So, my grade for Sony is a B+. They won a B+. Solid software, solid games. If I start making, stupid amounts of money off of all this fun YouTube stuff, then, I'm definitely going into the PS4 side and going to go pick one up. Because there's just a backlot of really great games, and sadly there's nothing on the Microsoft that's getting me excited as much. But hey, at least there's those third-party games, and, occasionally I get a good game for, you know, games for gold, but even the PS Plus service has delivered better games and more games consistently than what Microsoft's offered, where we mostly get, like, shit offerings like Sonic Racing All-Stars, yeah! Ugh, come on, give me something good. So, those are my thoughts. That finishes my E3 coverage. I'd hope these videos would get a few more views, but hey, I like talking about video games, so I might talk about more video game stuff in the future. So thanks for hanging around. Remember, lobsters and tennos, but don't you grab it.